And as you say, just a month ago, it was as if the world was ending. And it's always good to have your perspective here on Power Hour because so much of the mainstream media were freaking out.
I was right.
That's right. Is it too early to say you were right? Look, let's just go back 4 weeks and look at some of the headlines and the messages that we were being told. In The Economist, that had the headline, President Trump's mindless tariffs will cause economic havoc. And if you listen to the Democrats, well, this is what Elizabeth Warren claimed would happen to the economy.
Comes in and basically starts the dumbest trade war in the history of this country. This is going to be about potentially millions of people losing their jobs. It's going to be about millions of people losing their savings, many of people losing their retirement security, and at the same time taking on even higher costs for everything they buy. So that's going to push us in potentially to foreclosures or people being pushed out of their apartments. You know, I remember this from 2008 and how long it took us to dig our way out. And to this day, there are families, there are communities that still haven't recovered. Recessions can be all those fancy charts and graphs, but at the end of the day, people feel them one person at a time, and they can be devastating.
Adam, and in just a matter of weeks, we've seen the stock market recover. We've seen a deal being done. You know, you were right.
Yeah, look, the jobless rate in the US is still very low, as I understand it, below 5%, I think. As you say, the stock market's been booming again. Look, it's early days. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I mean, clearly forecasts like that have just been proved hopelessly wrong so far. I mean, as a general rule, things are never quite as bad or good as they seem. That's kind of my philosophy in life. So, you know, when you see hysteria, it's probably misplaced. And we certainly saw a lot of that in relation to these deals. So, look, let's just wait and see. It's not only the US and China that have a deal. The US and the UK have a deal, I understand. So I think what we're going to see, see US tariffs settle around the 10 to 30% mark on most countries, and it's going to be effectively a revenue raiser for the US government. And they may use some of that revenue to try to cut income taxes. We have to wait and see. But look, it's not going to be as disastrous as some people thought.
Oh, great to have your perspective as always. And look, also let's talk about US inflation data that is in. Inflation was softer than expected in April, slowing to its lowest rate in more than 4 years. The consumer prices rose 2.3% in April from a year earlier, which is the lowest annual inflation reading since 2021. Now, this has sparked a fresh push, I guess, from President Trump to see interest rates slashed. What do you make of it?
Well, look, firstly, this is quite funny too, because that was the month where the huge tariffs came in and inflation was supposed to explode, but actually inflation went down. So it's kind of funny, right? So inflation is basically in the US where it should be, between 2 and 3%. There's no worrying signs yet. You know, Trump, for all of his life, all of his career, has always been for lower interest rates, and he likes to badger the Fed to lower rates. You know, that is ultimately up to the Fed in the US, just like it's up to the RBA here to change interest rates independently. So we'll just wait and see what they do. They will probably cut them, I would say. Central banks have a proclivity, basically an inclination to cut rates when they can. And if there's no inflation, they will typically cut them. So when the US cuts, we'll probably see cuts here in Australia too. So that's good for people with home loans.
Absolutely. Finally, I want to get your thoughts on Donald Trump's trip to the Middle East. We've seen Saudi Arabia commit to investing $600 billion in the US in a deal that's set to strengthen America's energy security, defence industry and access to global infrastructure. Qatar Airways has signed a deal worth more than $200 billion for the purchase of more than 150 Boeing jets. Now, the president has celebrated the deal as the biggest in Boeing's history. You know, what's your assessment of the president's tour in the Middle East and the deals that he's been able to do?
Well, these deals are great for US corporations. I mean, he thinks of himself as a great deal maker, and he's made some great deals here. I think the more general point is it's good that he's visiting these Arabic countries. I mean, he's visiting the president of Syria. These were largely no-go zones for previous presidents, but he's being very pragmatic, I think, in world affairs. He's dealing with Israel, he's dealing with the Arab countries, he's dealing with Russia, he's dealing with Ukraine. I mean, he wants to be a peace president, I think, and I think that it's good that he's out there meeting people. From what I hear, Trump in person is very personable and likable, and I think that's worked in Saudi Arabia. You can see it.
Adam Creighton, Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs. Thank you so much for your time. Love having you on Power Hour.
Thanks for having me.